for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. All of that, and I think that's why I came to writing in the first place, was because I was at a point when I was younger. Well, I loved poetry and music and all of that, but I would never have thought to put words, my own words. And I was a painter. I liked painting. I was always interested in the medical arts. I didn't have that. I could sit in the back row and not say anything and just be in my world, the world that I learned to construct very early on, a world that gave me a sense of what was really going on, even from the time I was in diapers, the kind of spiritual realm that is the heart and soul of this place, of all of us. But I thought I would start with the poem for calling the spirit back from wandering the earth in its human feet. Because we are all on this journey. We're all on a journey as individual human beings. We're on a journey as a city. You're on a journey as a community here. We're on a journey in this state, in this country. A country is a person, in this earth, this beautiful earth. And that journey is not always easy. We came here to learn. And how do we learn? It's, we learn with challenge. Whatever discipline it is, that's how we learn. So we're in for some we've already experienced some of it, and that's not the end of it. But in the end, it's that circle. We will all come back to the circle. There's times for struggle and there's times for celebration. Turn off that cell phone, computer, and remote control. Open the door, then close it behind you. Take a breath offered by friendly winds. They travel the earth gathering essences of plants to clean. Give it back with gratitude. If you sing, it will give your spirit lift to fly to the stars' ears and back. Acknowledge this earth who has cared for you since you were a dream, planting itself precisely within your parents' desire. Let your moccasin feet take you to the encampment of the guardians who have known you before time, who will be there after time. They sit before the fire that has been there without time. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial, insecure jitters. Be respectful of the small insects, birds, and animal people who accompany you. Ask their forgiveness for the harm we humans have brought down upon them. Don't worry. The heart knows the way, though there may be high-rises, interstates, checkpoints, armed soldiers, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey might take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100, 1,000, or even more. Watch your mind. Without training, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by thieves of time. Do not hold regrets. When you find your way to the circle, to the fire kept burning by the keepers of your soul, you will be welcomed. You must clean yourself with cedar, sage, or other healing plant. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Let go the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are coming in our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. Call your spirit back. It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after having been lost for so long. Your spirit will need to sleep after it is bathed and given clean clothes. Now you can have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. Keep room for those who have no place to go. Make a giveaway, and remember, keep the speeches short. Then you must do this. Help the next person find their way through the dark.
Who helps you find your way through the dark? You've talked about how the elders prophesied this time, and you talk about this as a time of brokenness, and you've shared around your own stories of personal suffering, right? And the suffering of your people, and still you managed to create and persist and love. And how do you do that?
I've had many teachers in my life. I talk about some of them. I have a new memoir coming out in September, Poet Warrior. And I talk about, not all of them, I just talk about a few of them in here. And I realize I've had teachers all along the way. Some of them are in the spiritual realm, and some of them are, poets or musicians that lived a long time ago that I've never met in person, but I have their music and their poetry or their words. Some of them are the plants. Some are the birds. There are many of them. Mm-hmm. They're all around us. The Pacific Ocean was a teacher of mine, outside of Oahu. But yeah, there are many teachers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it seems like that sense of being connected to the natural world and to people who were alive and are now gone. We were talking about that before too, that transition from life to death. It feels like you have it's almost like no fear, right? It's all one.
Oh, I have the usual fears. I think the body wants to live, and it will hang on. But yes, I guess what I've been shown or taught, and you can say by teachers, I've been blessed with a lot of teachers, in different arts, the healing arts, the literary arts, musical arts, and so on. But ultimately, it's all connected, and it's all, as a musician, I come down, it's all rhythm, energy, it's all rhythm. A lot of healers, you can get that if something is off. Like right now we know something is off. We can feel it. I think we all feel it. We've gone through different moments of it. And a lot of that is to build our muscle. We're building spiritual muscle right now. And so what helps everyone is certainly to be together. We don't need any of this divisiveness. And that only happens when people stop listening and stop seeing each other as, I used to say relatives, but we don't get along with all our relatives, but it's sort of like that. It's like we still, in a family, you get to, I think that's the thing about families is, sometimes I realize you're with people that you wouldn't be with otherwise, but they teach you. It's a teaching kind of thing. But, yeah, that's what I see happening right now, is that we're in a time, it's like, okay, there's layers of it. We develop spiritual muscle. I know with this McGirt decision, it's sort of like being, like we're here, we've been here as indigenous people, and yet to have almost everything stolen, even, you can't steal our spirits, but almost everything. And then just to have an announcement from the Supreme Court to affirm something that we already knew, that we're human beings, and that we have ways of governance, and that we are legitimate entities, just like the state or just like the city. That was amazing. It's almost like somebody took your name away, and then suddenly they say, okay, you're a person now. Like you were not a person, and now, we recognize you as a person. We recognize you as a human being. But what was strange, about a few days later, I was driving with my husband it was the middle of the pandemic. We have a really, one of the smallest RVs made. It's like a big van, driving way up to the Northwest to record my new album. And I'd had a dream the night before I saw the Supreme Court building explode. And it was like one of those wide awake, full color. And I woke up, and the next thing I know, we're driving and we're getting all these calls that certain people in the Oklahoma government were immediately trying to overturn the McGirt decision. Like the next day, they were doing underhanded things that were being reported to overturn it. And that I want to read you this quote because I'm thinking, because ultimately in all it is about balance. If you look at, I think indigenous, a lot of the ceremonial ritual stuff, even in Christianity and other tribal ceremony, it's about balance. How do you find balance? Which again goes back to rhythm. Mm-hmm. And there was one of the people who was behind this destruction or disappearance of Native peoples was Dawes, Massachusetts Senator Henry Dawes, who was initiated the Dawes Act, which divided community-owned lands into individually owned allotments, which became a way to steal more land. And one thing he said, I found this, I was reading, The Promise of Oklahoma in the Smithsonian Magazine in April. It was April edition. And it was in 1893. He thought he was helping, and some people do think they're helping Native Americans assimilate into white America's cultural and economic systems. But he says he was mystified by Native Americans' practice of sharing resources without trying to exploit them for personal profit. There is no selfishness which is at the bottom of civilization, he reported to the Board of Indian Commissioners in Washington. Until this people consent to give up their lands, they will not make much progress. And there it is. But then I think, okay, how do we get to the root of this? Because it's not helping anybody. We'll be in this constant state of land grab. And no one is at rest for that. I have a line in one of my poems, the kitchen table poem, I call it. It's like,
I love that poem.
Yeah, perhaps the world ends here. It's something along the lines of, it's not even, there's really no winners or losers. Somebody might be a victor, but they suffer just as the so-called loser. And so how in all of this do we find a place, how do we find, that circle? How do we, I don't know. I'm like you guys. I have a lot of questions. I'm not sitting up here with answers. I'm just trying to say that I'm trying to find the way too. I've come to I'm 70 years old now, and I realize that I'm half intuition and creativity and half an overanalyzer, which doesn't always balance out very well. But sometimes I just lay it out, like common sense. Here's what is. Here is what is. This is, here are these beautiful lands. What's coming back to us about this? Well, we've got a pandemic. Well, there's destruction. We're watching. This was foretold. I heard about this stuff going on when I would sit in those circles anytime I could with elders who know things. And they said, one day, if people forget their ways, which means, you can say for traditional Native people, but I think for traditional for indigenous, for those universal laws, which say, praise the creator of all of us, treat each other well, don't bring harm willingly upon other people, listen, take care of your gifts. That if we stop doing that, what's going to happen? We are going to see fires, we're going to see drought, there's going to be food shortages, all of these things we're seeing, pandemics. But I also believe that it can be, we're in the thick of something. But I also like to think, how am I going to because sometimes I despair. Like I was despairing when I came in here and thought, how am I going to be up here talking to how am I going to be up here? Because everything I write is based on a kind of joyful beingness and being able to create and being part of this incredible beauty and mystery of this world. So I've learned I'm learning, I don't always do it well, is to sit with the angst, try to sit with it. Even talk to it and say, okay, you go sit way over there, I don't want you near me. But just try to sit with it and use common sense. That's where my analytical side comes in. Okay, here's the factors, here's what we're dealing with. And everybody has, a lot of times, and I can get into this too, where you think, well, it's too much. What can I do? I make no difference, but everybody makes an absolute difference. Every one of us lives in this incredible, complex world that is so creatively different. Everybody, even if you think you're not creative, look at your life. You've made, it's this incredible world. So I have to see it like an incredible opportunity, and poetry leads me there. What is poetry for me? I think of rhythm, I think of sound art, I think of going beyond words, because I came to poetry to get beyond words. Because words can get in the way, is to get beyond words. And maybe that's how we'll learn to communicate, is to get beyond the words, because right now the words are tripping us up. Laws that say that we are not allowed to tell what really happened. What good is that going to do? It doesn't protect anyone. That's why that's why it was put into place. The truth hurts. It's painful for everybody. But we've seen that happen in families with healing. If, there's a truth, maybe people keep it hidden for a long time and then it comes up. And yes, it's ugly and chaotic and we don't know what to do with it but it's so clearing. Wouldn't it be amazing if it just all came out and then we could all sit down and share food? It's exciting to have all kinds of food to eat, different people, and get on with it. Into taking care of this incredible place instead of destroying it or a few people appearing to own everything.
So maybe the earth is trying to rebalance itself. People say that. And I do know when I talk to people, though, even when you tell the truth, there's a lot of anger. And when people are facing, we're facing a fight now in Oklahoma, it sounds like, with what's happening tonight. And then there's fear, this COVID, this Delta variant. In my conversations with people, there's just a lot of fear. You have that amazingly powerful poem about fear, like talking to fear. I just wonder those elements of trust and fear and fight and anger. I don't know what you say to those.
Well, we all need a way to move these stories through us. Some people are really good, running is a good one. We all have our ways. And poetry or writing or the arts became my way of being able to express what I didn't always understand, or to approach the questions that we all deal with. Everybody deals with the same questions. What are we doing here? Why am I here? What does it mean? Do I matter? Does anything matter? I mean, you can lay out all the philosophical, religious, etc. all over. They're all about those questions that we all have. And each of us has very particular tools in which we've all brought, everybody's different. We've all brought different perspectives and tools that we came in with. And then some of it we've gathered up being out in this world, and we've gathered up beliefs, and some of them work for us, and some of them we're going to have to let go because they don't work and they're destroying us.
And you say we learn from our enemies. I know you want to share some music, but you also shared a beautiful image before we came in here. I think you have your book that's about the project, because you were talking about poems all over the planet, but with no borders, no boundaries, no divisions, right? Just land and earth and stories.
Yes, when it was announced I was U.S. Poet Laureate. See, a poet laureate can have, usually if you don't have a project, this is how it's come down. I mean, it's gone through different iterations, it's an honorary position. And there's no really job description. It's an appointment by the Librarian of Congress. And ultimately, it's an honorary position for poetry. Well, you can have a project, and then you'll do 2 terms, and then I have an unprecedented, well, it is precedented. Robert Pinsky did a 3rd term, and I'm the only other person. And it's because of the pandemic, really. It's not because I'm special. It's because there was a pandemic, and so it was harder to get, I was all over the place virtually. I went all over, but it was because of the pandemic. And, Tracy K. Smith, the poet laureate before me, was wonderful. She's a wonderful poet and person and humanitarian. And her project, because it was during the last administration, was to go around to rural communities. She curated or edited a wonderful small book of poetry. It's one of my favorite little anthologies with poems. What did she call it? I forget the name of it. And went around to rural communities, and they just read poems and talked about them. And they were able to talk, using poetry. And I like that project. Well, I didn't know I was going to be named U.S. Poet Laureate, and immediately with interviews, I was bombarded with, "What's your project?" Well, I apologize if any of the projects I said that I'm not doing. I have all kinds of ideas. If I had a creative team, every day I have new projects or ideas, and I had all kinds of projects I wanted to do. But I settled on a map. I have this thing about mapping. Ultimately, how do you map the soul? And maybe that's what poets do. We're all mapping a part of the soul. Maybe that's what everybody does. Maybe that's what a mathematician does. Maybe that's what any of us do, is map the soul. And but I was also came into this, it was unprecedented that a Native person and a Muskogee Creek person and somebody from Oklahoma and Tulsa was U.S. Poet Laureate. And but I wanted people to know that, one, I'm not the only Native poet. There are many of us, and that we're part of your communities, and we're all over this country. So my original idea, of course, I had this huge original idea, was to, one is that Library of Congress, I wanted to, for my orientation, I remember years ago stepping into the Library of Congress, looking up and just being blown away, and I thought, where do you start? What door? What's the door? What door do you go into? And so they took me around. I wanted to go to maps and photos and all kinds of, and they were wonderful. The staff there was wonderful. So I worked with the maps department and with the department that what is it called? It says in here. Anyway, they wound up doing, is it Folklife Center? Doing a whole, recorded all these contemporary poets. So now there is a collection in the Library of Congress of the voices of contemporary Native poets that wasn't there before. But my original idea was to digitally set up a map of the U.S. with all the native poets. The second part was, well, we're not all here by ourselves. I came up with Sandra Cisneros. We call him Q. He's from here. What is his whole name? Anyway, and I met him in Chicago years ago, a poet. I mean, we all know each other. I was fortunate to have, Adrienne Rich as a mentor, and Audre Lorde. Talk about powerful, women poets. June Jordan. And so, there's this, so I wanted them to be on the map too, sort of like have overlays, like here's an overlay of contemporary Native poets, and you could see them all over the United States. And then you could see the lines of connection. And then you would see, all the American poets, and then see the lines of connection. Well, that project, that would take a lot of resources, I learned. And it's like, okay, now we have 47 U.S. contemporary poets. But it's a starting place, and already a group in the Northwest, up in Washington State, did a map of Washington State poets. So people are, starting to add their own maps and do it. But in picking out a map, I picked out a map for the digital. It's up as a digital project, and then we have a book of the poems here. In the digital project, the map, there are no political boundaries. All you see is earth and water. And it's really astounding to see your world that way. There's no border between the US and Mexico, none between Canada. There's no names in different languages. It's just all, it's really, and then to have a poet, the words of a poet, come up, you can click on it, you hear them talk about place. And why are they speaking from that place? So it kind of shifts really the idea of place, having a map like that. It shifts the idea of place, and then how poetry emerges, or how each of us really emerges from a place. I don't think we realize how connected we are. I remember when Robert Hass was made U.S. Poet Laureate, and I took part in several programs he did out in California with Watershed. He thought it was important for school children, and I think it is for all of us to know what watershed we live in. What are the plants? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're so interdependent, and we don't even realize it. With our food. I think during the pandemic, we started to see a little of that as the shelves were clearing out, and people doing gardens, planting gardens, and there's so much giving. There's so much generosity from plants. Animals for humans. Anyway, that's my project. And it's grown into other smaller projects. Several of the poets in here are doing different community projects, based on this idea.
I have a follow-up thought, but I'm sure people would love to hear you read another poem, if you would.
Okay.
Can you think of one?
Oh yeah, let's see. Well, I have the kitchen table poem.
That's perfect, actually.
Which I put in my memoir. It's called Perhaps the World Ends Here. And I think of my poems sometimes as me talking to my spiritual teachers. It's like sometimes things will come to me and I'm thinking, whoa, and it happens musically too. I love to improvise. And it happens musically. I'll be playing along and it's like, that is so cool. Where did that, thank you. I don't know where it came from. I have to do my work on it. There's a lot of revision, but that's just to get it realized in earthly terms as finely as possible. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Babies teethe at the corners. They scrape their knees under it. It is here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. We make men at it. We make women. At this table, we gossip, recall enemies and the ghosts of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor, falling down selves, and as we put ourselves back together once again at the kitchen table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We have given birth on this table and have prepared our parents for burial here. At this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite.
Thank you. I love that one. I've used that one often, and it's perfect because I was thinking I really want to honor the women who pulled this together. And that seems like such a strong woman's poem to me because of those associations with women at the kitchen table. And I'm just curious what you would say about what it means to be embodied at this time in a woman's body, right? And to carry women's wisdom. How is that different than a man's wisdom? What does it mean to you to be an Indigenous woman speaking at this time? What's particular about women's Indigenous voices that we need to hear now that's part of our healing today?
That's a big question because I fought against it. And I even have in the memoir, I have a great-grandfather that I'm very close to. He was gone in body before I was born, but he's always around me. He helps me. And so it opens up. Maybe I can find this and I'll read this little part. And then I have this other piece. Because this whole book is really kind of about that question, about that. And I had just found it while I was sitting in there.
Welcome.
Yeah, I'll find it. His name is Henry Marcy Harjo. And I do not remember when I first became aware of the presence of my great-grandfather, Henry Marcy Harjo, from Eufaula, Canadian tribal town in Wind Clan, except that he was just there and has been looking after me since childhood. He helped me find the way as I have been lost many times. I always come back to stand on the same islands of loss and family, tribal, and earth history. I return to moments of fracture as if all the broken pieces have voices, and they call me back to witness. They are in need of something I have not been able to give them. They want to be heard. They want to speak. When I speak, when I create, I am afraid of failing my art, my people, my family. I cannot render with the delicacy, fierceness, and tough beauty in which I perceive. I have failed many times what was given me to do. I call out as I have many times before in these moments. Why did you give me this legacy of poetry, this music, this body, this place from which to speak, when I don't look and act the part and I'm not the best representative of my people or anyone else, and you made me a woman when women's voices and worth are not regarded in this society in which we are now living? That's when I hear and feel my great-grandfather standing near me. He lived a life of integrity and gave all that he had with a great love for his people. He was a Baptist minister. He helped start the Murrow Indian Children's Home, a home for Indian orphans, and he began a mission near Stuart, Florida, for the Seminole people. He was a superintendent for IHH Mission, an Indian school in Indian Territory. He was also appointed postal superintendent of the community of Wheelaka. He sat in the House of Kings and tribal government and was appointed by President Herbert Hoover to hold the office of principal chief during an interim election. I have uncovered many records of proceedings in which he stood as a moral witness for many disputes and transactions. And then it goes on to what he saw as somebody who was living at those times, coming into Indian territory and then watching the state of Sequoia and natives being totally discounted. My great-grandfather really doesn't have to say much with words. Just his presence often tells me what I need to remember. Though he was born around 1860 and passed from this world when he was 71 years of age, time means nothing in the place we inhabit together. We speak without the burdens of words. This is when I see him, find him in the heart territory between us. I know the quality of love he carried and the burden. He listens to me to complain about failures. Yes, I know about failures, he nods. I can't tell you about being a woman, he says, but God loves all of his creations. Not one is above the other. Let's sit together and listen. Then we will pray for a path that will lift up the people, including all the beloved beings of creation. You will find yourself in that lifting up. Now, I have been all over the world, and I have been in indigenous communities from one end of this country and the other, and have been invited into all kinds of native places. And in their prayers, they always pray for everyone. There is never that kind of division. That always stands out for me. So the way I've constructed this memoir, which might it's really about this power. What does it mean? Because I fought against it. I grew up in Tulsa, seeing that, seeing that when I was growing up, there weren't very many choices for women. The big thing was girls would have bride dolls. That was the big thing. Or you could be a teacher, which is an honorable profession. It was very limited. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking very young, I wanted to be an artist. And I watched what my mother went through, and some of that is in here, because of femaleness. And yet, ultimately, and there's a poem I have in American Sunrise. It's called, I'm not going to read the poem, it's called Washing My Mother's Body, which is going to be a book. 10 Speed Press is going to bring it out. But I love this moment in there where a woman should be honored like a queen. Traditionally, we treated our women with that kind of respect, my Creek husband tells me. Ha, I laugh and ask him, then why aren't you cooking my dinner? Which comes at a place, it needs that kind of humor, but it's true. What happens in a society when women are disregarded, devalued, in which the work of women is paid almost nothing? When you think about children, that is the most precious resource. It's not oil. That is the most precious, ultimate precious resource. And the caretakers of children have the least requirements for, teachers. Why aren't we honoring education? Why aren't we honoring the caretakers? The caretakers of children. I mean, there's something askew. It's out of balance. It's out of balance, and every one of us can do, it's within all of us to speak and to, it can be shifted. Right now it looks like it's just totally gone at moments. At moments it feels like giving up. But, even doing a series like this is important to empower, that if we empower women, we empower everyone. If everyone is empowered, yes. I mean, it's common sense. And I don't know, I would like to start a whole coming of age. A lot of our cultures have the coming of age. I mean, how do we know we've stepped into, that we're stepping into a place of power? Young girls aren't often given that. Young men either. Where there's a doorway that says welcome, and this is what you're going to have, these trials. You can come to us. I wrote a poem for a granddaughter, my first granddaughter coming of age, called For a Girl Becoming, to say, we need a doorway. I have it here. Maybe I can end with it.
Sure.
But in this book, it's interesting how it's kind of constructed, because I have all these stories talking to my great-grandfather, and then it starts out with me. I used to love driving my Aunt Lois Harjo around, because we'd go to all of the old people who are my age and older and hear the stories. And it ends with me, and it starts with me with our cousin George Kozer Sr., and it ends with me hanging out with my cousin George Kozer Jr. with talking about the same stuff, that we always talk about. But in the way I constructed this, there's a character called Girl Warrior who goes through a life. And at one point, it's really bad. It got really bad. And it says, Girl Warrior had lied and said she was going out with her friend to hang out at her house. She wasn't a friend, rather a girl she barely knew, and had a bad feeling when she asked her to double date. Girl Warrior was not allowed to date, nor was she usually allowed to go anywhere with friends or without, but she begged her mother, and her stepfather was working late, i.e. he was seeing a woman on the other side of town. Girl Warrior got in the car and knew her fate was in the hands of reckless strangers. She had a dime taped inside her shoe for a phone call, but who would she call if there was trouble? No one. They drove to another town. Her date was 10 years older. He bought them beer. What the hell? It was the first time she had anything resembling a date. She wanted to be normal. Every drink made her feel more and more normal. Girl Warrior's new girlfriend left with her boyfriend without telling her. She saw the red of their taillights disappear into a darkness that grew larger and larger until Girl Warrior had no way to get home. She just wanted to be normal. Drink Coke, slip her hair back, and laugh with someone who might offer his hand, his jacket, or any small kindness between you friends. There was more beer. If she wanted a ride before her stepfather made it back to the house, she had to pay the darkness either way. So what happens in this story on the spiritual realm is her spiritual teachers give her, I write a coming-of-age ceremony in the book with that construct to help everyone who reads it, because all of us, there's these big moments like birth, it's huge, 7 years old. A lot of it's in sevens, and you'll find sevens are always really important. 7 years old, you make your own community. 14, puberty, 21, all of these are sevens, and we go through them all of our lives. So there's all these doorways, and that's why ritual is so important. Solstice is a doorway, equinox, a lot of religious and tribal ceremonies are around these different kinds of markers, because we need freshening up, so to speak. We need doorways that mark these. And young people, they need these doorways. So in here, I write about, I get this girl warrior going through here, goes through a ceremony in the book and becomes poet warrior. That's how the name came about. And I wrote it in here to be helpful. Children coming of age need to be taught by the elders who pass on what has strengthened and inspired them in this life. When this time of becoming is honored by their families, their community, the young ones emerge into adulthood with the lit charge to develop spiritually, more mentally, and physically, and are an intimate part of carrying the community into the future. They are empowered by being brought to the doorway of celebration. And so on. But yeah, I have that poem. It's kind of long. for Girl Becoming, but maybe I can end with that.
Yeah, you could end with that. And I think Shannon might be somewhere close by with questions from there she is.
Oh, okay.
With questions from the audience. And then maybe, do you want to do the poem before the questions or after the questions?
I
It's
can
up to
do
you.
it after to kind of
Okay.
close it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. If you have questions, will you pass them to the center? I see one down there, and Circe's going to gather them down the center aisle. So pass your questions towards the beautiful. I see questions coming towards the center. And then Shannon, do you have some from online?
Yes, I do.
Excellent.
Where are they taping online? I don't see a camera.
Right up there. The camera's up there. Well,
Okay.
it's small, hidden actually in the balcony. And it's
Okay.
in a room. You can't see it. You're right.
It's
They're
a
small.
hidden camera.
They're small and hidden. They are.
It's a
They're
hidden
small.
camera.
You
Hello,
gotta know.
everyone.
It took me years to find them, actually. Okay.
So one from online. How do you hear your poetry? Does it come from within or from outside of you? And follow up, when was the first time you recall hearing it?
Oh, that's interesting. I think both. I mean, a lot of it comes from, I think it's, what I love about poetry, it's like layers of time and events and gestures and things. Like I was thinking about Wilma Mankiller coming over, about being in that Woodward Park over there with her and Charlie Soap. And then just thinking about Wilma and thinking about women's empowerment and how I miss Wilma being in this world. And so a poem might start out with that kind of ache, and then maybe something in the park, and then something I totally don't expect. I don't know, sometimes they're from inside and outside, and what's the difference anyway, ultimately? I mean, it's really kind of the same thing, ultimately. And I don't know, the first time that I listened or heard, I didn't start writing poetry till I was in my 20s. And although I wrote some limericks to make fun of teachers when I was younger. Yeah. And I was always drawing. I used to get in trouble drawing caricatures that kids would pay me to draw different things. And, but yeah, it's a listening. I mean, I think everything's a listening art. I don't think it's just poetry. Poetry is certainly oral. Fiction, novels, it all comes from orality. But yes, I know that I remember my mother's, and I write about that in here, speaking poetry, and I love the sound. It's just the sound. To me, sound is just, like I can feel, I always feel the rhythm, I hear sounds, and just caught by words.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Another question?
What advice do you have for a high school teacher teaching an American Sunrise? Approaches are most important pieces, etc.
Wow.
Well, I don't know. That's a bit, what advice? I think, well, I write about that. I'm not trying to promote my book. It's just that I write about that in here about what if I had been taught. I remember going into an 8th grade class here in Tulsa, and the teacher, she's a good teacher, but she said, okay, everybody write a poem, and everybody's like, what? What's a poem? How can I write a poem? We don't know what it is. Or going into a class and you knew the teacher was dreading the poetry. This poetry, everybody was dreading, you could feel it, versus my sister who had taught at Liberty Mound School, and I would go visit, and the kids would come up, Mrs. Barles, can we write poetry today? So there was something very different happening. And one is like, I love poetry, where it stopped me was when I was told, what was the poet trying to say? What did the poet mean? And you're reading a kind of, first you have to navigate a different kind of language. And often it was, a different century before, because we didn't often back then get contemporary poems or language or, diction. But what if you just said, listen, like you don't, you in music class, we would listen We would learn what we could listen for, but at first, it's to listen. So if you first just listen to the poem, and maybe just listen, enjoy it. Don't come to it with worry that you're going to have to be asked what the poet was thinking, because who knows what the poet doesn't even know what they're thinking. Because you're listening, and a lot of it's you're playing with you don't always know exactly. That's not the point. And so that's part of it, is just listen and approach it like you would. We listen to a song on the radio or an orchestral piece or whatever. We're listening, and for what it brings. It's bringing us something, and everybody's experience will be a little bit different. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Who are some of the poets that influenced you?
Oh, there's been a lot of poets, past, present, and future. My mother used to read me, she memorized, she had an 8th grade education at the border of Oklahoma and Arkansas, and little one-room school, and they learned William Blake. And they memorized, and so she knew a lot of William Blake poems. And so I heard those. And I loved song lyrics. My mother used to write songs. Mm-hmm. And so I like Bob Dylan. I was probably one of the very few poets that didn't get upset when Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for poetry. One of the very few poets that didn't get upset.
Interesting.
But Adrienne Rich. Adrienne Rich took me a while with her poetry sometimes, but Diving into the Wreck is one of my favorite poems.
I love her.
And I need that poem these days, because we are all like diving into the wreck, diving into the unknown, which is what you do. I mean, that's what's exciting about poetry or about writing or creating. I realize that my process is getting a great deal of angst. And then I start moving in that way. Audre Lorde, of course, and I speak of her in here. Leslie Marmon Silko, who is known as a novelist, wonderful poet. Galway Kinnell was one of the first poets I heard read live. And I heard him read The Bear, and he could recite most of his poems. So that...
I'm surprised you have Emily Dickinson in here.
Yes, Emily Dickinson too. Well, when I was 8 years old, I asked my mother for books for my birthday, and she gave me that Louis Untermeyer's Golden Treasury of Poetry. And I found Emily Dickinson in there. So I included her poem in here because that was important. That poem especially was important. Yeah.
Are any of your books on Audible, and would you consider being the voice talent?
Yes. Crazy Brave is on Audible, and I got an award last year from Audiophile. I think it's for recording an American Sunrise. I recorded this, and then I got a runner-up for conflict resolution. And I'm talking right now with Audible. I have a contract to record Poet Warrior, and we're trying to figure out, I might record it myself.
Nice.
And or I go into a studio in town. Yeah.
Do we have time for a few more?
That's fine. Maybe 2 more.
In the poem Exile of Memory, a question is raised. When it is time to leave this place of return, what will I say that I found here? Can you share what was found and how you were moved by the experience?
What will I say that I found here? Well, I'm still finding things. Yeah, I'm still finding. I mean, even in all of this turmoil, I mean, it's helpful to sit and be quiet. It's best to be outside. It's easier to see that way. It's like you can have we're in turbulent water, so to speak, but you can see to the bottom with stillness, with still waters. So in a way, you have to still the waters within yourself to see. So right now, I feel like I'm in the thick of it. But every day there's something. I mean, I think it's important to, I just got to see some of my grandchildren and the great-grandson, and just that delight they have for living. We can tend to lose that along the way because the burdens. But then you can look at the burdens. I mean, there's a way to go about it, I think. I'm starting to learn this. Sometimes it takes a while. That is to even look at the conflict joyfully or try to experience it wide open and not get caught up. That's the thing, is to not get caught up. Sometimes there's so many things I just want to say and blurt out and fight. Just get in the thick of it. But my poetry voice, or that voice has taught me, it's the I think I'm calling it the voice now. It teaches me that there's a thing called timelessness. And a lot of this stuff is in the moment. And yes, it can be pivotal. But it's important to get into that space of timelessness, of eternity. If you look at it with your eyes of eternity, it shifts your response. It kind of shifts things. So I try to get there. Sometimes I don't. But I think that's what poetry and music, it gives you the ability, it helps you get there. I don't know that it gives you the ability, it helps you.
Do you think it gets easier as you're getting older?
I think so. I mean, I think that hormones are dangerous, and I think they need to be put on the endangered, not endangered species, like in the dangerous drug category.
Right.
Because I don't see how people, young people, I remember being shot through with hormones and the things that it would make me say and do. And every now and then I'll get a shot of, it's just like, I feel and think, oh my God, how do any of us survive that? Because when you get older, I mean, it's just the way it is. You back off from it a little, and it gives you have a whole different perspective. And the other, I guess, is there just, to get the species, energy. It's about building and making and building and all of that, but it's a wild ride. That's my next memoir, not really.
It's been a wild ride. One last one. Yep.
One last one.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for sharing your time and talent with us. As an Indigenous aspiring writer, I have trouble balancing the trauma with the triumph of my ancestors, often letting grief outweigh the good.
Yeah.
Where do you go, physically or spiritually, to hold both and to create through both?
That's a beautiful question. In a way, it answers what you were asking earlier about being a Native woman. And women, period, carry a lot. We're built that way. And to be a Native woman, there's so much that goes through us, and there's a lot of grief. It's not just grief. I mean, it's an amazing, the endurance and the creativity and the humor that runs through us. But sometimes, I don't know, Native people, I think we see a lot more funerals. We go to a lot more funerals than everybody else, I've noticed. We deal with there's a lot more rape. Our numbers with the COVID numbers are off the charts over anybody else. Diabetes, any of this kind of thing. We watch, because think about it. I mean, think about it, if an alien spaceship landed here and came into this church and said, okay, we're changing all of this around and you guys can't believe what you believe here. We're going to take you out of your place and we're moving you, and you have to live within our structures. And in these structures, we're going to take your children away from you, and they'll be crying and you'll be crying. But we're going to take them away from you and take them far away and they're going to be raised by people who are trying to make them into aliens. And they will, because they'll never fit, they'll beat them, and some of them will wind up buried out in the yard of the school because, and that's still happening, to try to fit us into another way that's not, that our way fits these lands, in this place. As my husband said, we had the best immigration policies. We welcomed people, and if they had, things that could be helpful and teach us, it was just different. And so what do you do with that? And this whole McGirt thing is just part of it. And we have to find a way to navigate that in a way. What helped me was to realize, someone said that those who, like if you think of a mentor or teacher situation, and I think of the Creator being the ultimate teacher, is those they love most, not necessarily love most, but know that they will test. You get the most tests. Those they know that can carry. So Native people have been utterly tested, horribly tested. Means everybody else has too, because all of this has affected everybody else. So the way I think, for me it was poetry. Because we have to go through it. We have the highest suicide rate. Almost everybody I know has probably tried suicide, or have gotten to that point, or it's alcohol. We're not the only alcoholics in the population. I think everybody else has trouble dealing with things too, but we carry, because of the history in this country and because of what has been done to delete us from these lands, because that we're here bothers the consciousness so much that they want to have a McGirt forum and not include natives, because we represent a kind of truth that no one wants to deal with. So forgiveness is important. It doesn't mean you forget. And learning to, I guess what helped me, because there were periods where I almost didn't make it, was realizing that it was all building material. It's all building material. I can build something with it. And to love to love what's good in people, and to honor yourself. It's hard to honor yourself when you're told that, and everything in society tells you that you're worth nothing. You think about Native women, we're at the bottom. The Deb Haaland is the U.S. Secretary of Interior, is amazing. And yet, we're the heart and soul. We're the heart and soul. You look and, you'll know that this country is on track when Native people and our cultures are at the center and with everyone, that we're not excluded. I think of this country as an adolescent, like an adolescent male, very young, and doesn't know quite, it's got a lot of energy, and is trying to find itself. And I thought I had invented that, and what was I listening to? They said Einstein had said something like that. I thought, well,
It's good company.
yeah, that's good company. I didn't know that, but yeah. So yeah, it's difficult, but we need writers. That's the thing. There's a lot of Native poets. People don't know that. There are more Native jazz musicians than any other group. There are more jazz musicians. People don't, they don't know that. But oh yeah, I have a song I want to play too. I pray for my enemies.
Yeah, and there's that great poem about the sax. But that's right. You want to do the song?
Yeah, maybe we should do that. I know that somebody wanted me to read For a Girl Becoming. It's a long poem though. Yeah, next time. But we can end with that song. But anyway, there's more to say. I appreciate that question. But writing, we all have ways to make it through. We were all given gifts, and if that's your gift, we need it. We need everyone's gifts. You know, we're all here. We're all part of, ultimately, we're all part of Earth. If you look at the Earth, again, it's all about perspective. If you look from the moon, we're one. Earth is a body, Gana Jaga, Mother Earth. That's us. That's who we are. So, yeah. There we go. This morning I pray for my enemies. And whom do I call my enemy? An enemy must be worthy of engagement. I turn in the direction of the sun and keep walking. It's the heart that asks the question, not my furious mind. The heart is a smaller cousin of the sun. It sees and knows everything. It hears the gnashing, even as it hears the blessing. The door to the mind should only open from the heart. An enemy who gets in risks the danger of becoming a friend. This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call my enemy? This morning, I pray for my enemy. And whom do I call?
I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Native American communities gathered here today, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. Oklahoma, formerly known as Indian Territory, is home to 39 federally recognized Native American tribes. The city of Tulsa is within the tribal boundaries of 3 of these federally recognized tribes: the Cherokee Nation, the Muskogee Creek Nation, and the Osage Nation. All Souls Unitarian Church, where we are meeting tonight, is on the Muskogee Creek Nation land. We recognize their history and commitment to our community and the land on which they settled, and we honor them with our acknowledgement. Thank you. Wado.